I found my seat next to the garbage can. That's not a metaphor. That's not me being dramatic. At my granddaughter's 5th birthday party, in my own son's house, my place card was set on a folding plastic chair in the corner of the kitchen, right next to the stainless steel trash bin where they threw away coffee grounds and chicken bones. The dining room was beautiful. I could see it from where I stood, frozen in the kitchen doorway. White linen tablecloth, fresh flowers in crystal vases, place settings with actual silverware. 23 guests were already seated or finding their chairs, laughing, chatting, complimenting Brianna on the decorations. Pink and gold streamers hung from the ceiling. A 3-tier princess cake sat on the sideboard. And there, at the head of the table, my granddaughter Ivy sat in her glittery purple dress, looking like the little angel she was. I was 58 years old. I had built a business from nothing and sold it for £4.2 million. I owned a restored farmhouse in the Cotswolds outright. I had raised a son, buried a husband, survived grief that nearly broke me, and rebuilt my life with my own 2 hands. And my daughter-in-law had put me next to the garbage. I heard her heels clicking on the tile before I saw her. Brianna appeared beside me, champagne flute in hand, wearing that smile I had come to know so intimately over the past 7 years. Sweet on the surface, poison underneath. "Eleanor, you found your spot." She gestured toward the plastic chair with her glass, as if she were showing me to a throne. "I thought you might appreciate some privacy. I know how overwhelming these big gatherings can be at your age, at my age." As if 58 made me decrepit. As if the woman who had once managed a staff of 43 and negotiated contracts with developers across Europe needed protection from a child's birthday party. I said nothing. I had learned, over 7 long years, that saying nothing was often the only power I had left. Brianna's smile widened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Besides, I think you'll find this spot suits you perfectly. You always did like to feel useful, and someone needs to be near the trash in case it overflows." She paused, her eyes meeting mine with something that looked almost like triumph. "I think you'll just adore sitting where you belong. Where I belong." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, though they were, not because they were calculated, though they absolutely were, but because in that moment, looking at the plastic chair and the garbage can and the party I hadn't even been officially invited to, I realized how far I had fallen, how much I had allowed, how many small humiliations I had swallowed in silence, telling myself it was worth it, telling myself I was keeping the peace, telling myself that access to my granddaughter was worth any price. I had been wrong. From the dining room, I heard Ivy's voice ring out. "Where's Nana Ellie? Mommy said she wasn't coming, but I want her to sit next to me." Brianna's expression flickered, just for a second. Then she recovered, calling back in her sweetest voice, "Nana Ellie is just getting settled, sweetheart. She wanted to help in the kitchen." Help in the kitchen. Like staff. Like someone who worked for her. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Really looked at her. The perfect blonde highlights. The designer dress. The diamonds in her ears that I knew for a fact my son couldn't afford on his salary. The manicured nails, the practiced smile, the absolute certainty in her eyes that she had won. And something inside me, something that had been bending for 7 years, finally broke. But not the way she expected. Not with tears. Not with a scene. Not with the emotional collapse she was probably hoping for, the one that would prove to everyone that Eleanor Ashworth was too unstable, too dramatic, too difficult to have around. No, something else broke, something quieter, something that had been holding me in place, keeping me tethered to a situation I should have walked away from years ago. I felt it snap, and I felt free. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to get something from my car." Brianna's eyes narrowed slightly. She hadn't expected calm. She had expected hurt, maybe tears, definitely retreat. Calm unsettled her. "The party is about to start," she said. "Ivy wants to open presents soon. This will only take a moment." I walked out of the kitchen, through the hallway, past the powder room, where 2 of Brianna's friends were refreshing their lipstick and gossiping about someone's divorce. I walked out the front door into the October afternoon, the air crisp and cool against my face. My car was parked at the end of the driveway. Brianna had made sure of that too. No room closer to the house, she had texted me that morning. So sorry. You understand. I always understood. That was my problem. I opened my car door and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, breathing. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely certain about what I was going to do. In my bag, I had 2 items. The first was the deed to a house. Not just any house. A beautiful 4-bedroom property near Richmond with a garden for Ivy to play in and excellent schools nearby. £1.2 million, paid in full. I had purchased it 6 months ago as a surprise for Gavin and Brianna's upcoming anniversary. A gift, a peace offering, a desperate attempt to buy my way back into my own family. The second item was an envelope, thick, heavy, filled with 5 years of bank statements, every transfer I had made to my son's account. Every school fee for Ivy, every car payment for Brianna, every renovation, every vacation, every designer bag that my daughter-in-law claimed she had saved for through her own careful budgeting. Documented, dated, irrefutable. I had kept those records out of habit. Good business practice. I never thought I would need them. I thought about what Brianna had said, where I belong, next to the trash, disposable, unwanted, tolerated only for what I could provide, and not even tolerated kindly. I thought about my son, Gavin, 34 years old, a solicitor at a respectable firm, and somehow still the little boy who avoided conflict at any cost. He wasn't at the party yet, running late from work, according to Brianna's dismissive explanation. He was always conveniently absent when his wife treated me worst. Whether that was coincidence or design, I had stopped trying to figure out. I thought about Ivy, my beautiful granddaughter, the light of my life. The reason I had endured plastic chairs and canceled dinners and forgotten invitations. The reason I had written check after check while being treated like an inconvenience. The reason I had bitten my tongue until it bled. 5 years old today, and she had asked for me at her party. She had wanted me next to her, not in the kitchen, not by the garbage, next to her. Brianna had lied to her, told her I wasn't coming, tried to poison even that pure, innocent love. I picked up both items from my bag, the deed to the house I had bought with love and hope and desperate naivety, the envelope of bank statements I had kept out of caution. I walked back into the house. The party was in full swing now. I could hear glasses clinking, children laughing, Brianna's voice rising above it all as she directed people to their seats, accepted compliments on the decorations, played the role of perfect hostess to perfection. She was good at roles. I had to give her that. She had played the role of loving daughter-in-law for just long enough to trap my son, and then the mask had started to slip. I walked through the kitchen, past my designated plastic chair and my companion garbage can, and into the dining room. 23 faces turned toward me, friends of Brianna's mostly, a few neighbors, Gavin's law partner and his wife, and at the head of the table, Ivy, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Nana, Ellie, you came! Mommy said you were too busy." "I'm never too busy for you, sweetheart," I said. My voice was steady, clear. "I just need to leave something for your mommy, and then I have to go." Brianna was staring at me from across the room. Her smile had frozen in place, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes, wondering what I was doing, wondering how to spin this. I walked to the coffee table in the center of the sitting area where the overflow gifts were stacked in their pretty pink wrapping paper, in full view of every guest, in full view of my granddaughter. I set down the deed first. Then I took it and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the sudden silence. "That was the deed to a house I bought for your parents," I said, looking at Ivy. She was too young to understand, but someday she would be told this story, and I wanted the truth to be part of it. I wanted to give them a gift, but I've realized that gifts are for family, and your mommy has decided I'm not family anymore. Brianna's face went pale. "Eleanor, what are you—" I set down the envelope of bank statements. 5 years of financial records. Every lie Brianna had told about her own earning power, documented in black and white. "That," I said, "is every payment I've made over the last 5 years. Ivy's school, the car, the kitchen renovation, the trip to the Maldives, every time your father asked me for help, and I gave it without question." I looked at Brianna now. "Every time you told him you managed the money so well, Every time you took credit for what I provided. The room was absolutely silent. I could have heard a pin drop on the oriental carpet. "Enjoy the party," I said, and I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked at a measured pace, my head held high, through the hallway and out the front door and down the driveway to my car. The October sun was warm on my face. The air smelled like fallen leaves and someone's wood-burning fireplace. I was almost to my car when I heard it, Brianna's voice rising to a scream. At first it was just wordless sound, a shriek of pure rage and disbelief. Then words started to form, tumbling out of the house through the open door, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "What is this? What the hell is this? She's insane. She's absolutely insane." I got into my car, started the engine. Brianna appeared in the doorway, the envelope clutched in her hand, her face red and contorted. "You think you can just... You can't prove. These don't mean..." But she was sputtering, because she knew. She knew exactly what those statements proved. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every time she had made Gavin feel grateful for her financial responsibility, when it was actually his mother's money keeping them afloat. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, carefully, the way I did everything in my life. In my rearview mirror, I could see guests spilling out of the house, confused, curious, watching the spectacle unfold. I could see Brianna screaming something at someone, waving the papers around. I could see her careful facade cracking apart in real time. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Peace. My phone started ringing before I reached the end of the street. Gavin. He must have arrived at the party. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Then Brianna's number. Then Gavin again. I turned off my phone and drove home. The drive from London to my house in the Cotswolds took just under 2 hours. I spent most of it in silence, not even turning on the radio. I needed to think, to process, to understand what I had just done and what it would mean. I had exposed my daughter-in-law as a liar and a manipulator in front of 24 witnesses. I had destroyed any hope of the peaceful, harmonious family relationship I had been trying so desperately to build. I had potentially damaged my relationship with my son, who would have to choose between believing his mother and believing his wife. And I had walked away from my granddaughter's birthday party without even giving her a hug. That last part hurt. It was the only part that hurt. Everything else felt like freedom. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my favorite armchair, looking out at the garden I had designed myself. The autumn colors were beautiful this year. Golds and reds and deep burnished oranges. Jeffrey would have loved it. My husband had always appreciated beauty. He had been dead for 6 years now. Heart attack, sudden and merciless. One moment, he was planning our anniversary trip to Venice. The next, he was gone. I had thought losing him would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. I was wrong. Losing him was devastating, but it was clean grief, pure, untainted by betrayal. What Brianna had done to me over the past 7 years was different. It was death by 1,000 cuts, small cruelties, calculated exclusions, the slow, deliberate erosion of my relationship with my son and granddaughter. And I had let it happen. That was the part I had to face now. I had let it happen because I was afraid. Afraid that fighting back would push Gavin away entirely. Afraid that I would lose access to Ivy. Afraid that I was the difficult one. The overbearing mother-in-law, the meddling grandmother that everyone jokes about. Brianna had counted on that fear. She had used it expertly. Every time I swallowed an insult, she learned she could push further. Every time I accepted a canceled visit with grace, she learned that my grace had no limits. Every time I wrote another check to help with expenses while being treated like an unwelcome stranger, she learned that my love could be exploited indefinitely. The plastic chair next to the garbage can. That was the line. 7 years of accumulated cruelty, and that was what finally made me say enough. I laughed out loud, alone in my beautiful house. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. A plastic chair. That was my breaking point. Not the time Brianna uninvited me from Christmas dinner the day before. Not the time she told Ivy I was too sick to visit when I was perfectly healthy. Not the time she accidentally forwarded me an email calling me a pathetic old woman who needed to learn her place. A plastic chair next to the garbage. where I belonged. I finished my wine and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in years. I dreamed of Jeffrey, which I rarely did anymore. In the dream, we were young again, walking along the beach in Cornwall where we had honeymooned 40 years ago. He was holding my hand and telling me something I couldn't quite hear over the waves. When I woke up, I remembered. He had been telling me he was proud of me. The next morning, my phone showed 63 missed calls, 41 from Gavin, 22 from Brianna. I had voicemails I didn't listen to, text messages I didn't read. I blocked both numbers and made myself breakfast. It was the first day of the rest of my life, and I had no idea what was coming next. To understand how I ended up next to that garbage can, you need to understand how it all began. Not the party, not even Brianna. You need to understand who I was before any of this happened, and how I became the kind of woman who would tolerate being treated like trash in her own son's house. I met Jeffrey Ashworth when I was 23 years old. He was an architect, 5 years older than me, with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone in the room smile. I was working as a receptionist at a design firm, dreaming of something bigger, but not quite believing I could achieve it. Jeffrey believed it for me. He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and he spent the next 32 years helping me become the woman he always knew I could be. We built Ashworth Interiors together, though it was my name that went on the door. He designed the spaces. I made them beautiful. We were partners in every sense of the word. By the time I was 40, we had a staff of 43 people, contracts with developers across England and Europe, and a reputation that opened doors wherever we went. By the time I was 52, I sold the business for £4.2 million and retired to the life I had earned. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before any of that, there was Gavin. Our son was born when I was 24. A difficult pregnancy, a complicated delivery, and then suddenly there he was. This tiny, perfect human who looked up at me with Jeffrey's eyes and changed everything I thought I knew about love. I adored him. We both did. But building a business while raising a child meant sacrifices. It meant late nights at the office while Jeffrey handled bedtime routines. It meant missing school plays because I was meeting with clients in Manchester. It meant being physically present but mentally elsewhere, already planning the next project, the next deal, the next step. Gavin never complained. He was a sweet boy, quiet and eager to please. He never threw tantrums or demanded attention the way other children did. At the time, I thought that meant he was fine, that he understood, that our love was so obvious, so constant, that my physical absence didn't matter. I was wrong about that too. Jeffrey died when Gavin was 28. Heart attack, sudden and merciless, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. One moment my husband was reviewing blueprints for a renovation project. The next moment he was gone. I was at a client meeting when I got the call. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I don't remember much of the next few weeks at all. Grief does strange things to memory. What I do remember is Gavin at the funeral, standing tall in his black suit, holding my hand, being strong for me when he was falling apart inside. He had worshipped his father. They had a bond that I sometimes envied, if I'm being honest. While I was building an empire, Jeffrey was teaching Gavin to ride a bike, helping him with homework, attending every single football match and school concert and award ceremony. He was the present parent while I was the successful one. After Jeffrey died, I tried to make up for lost time. I sold the business within the year because I didn't have the heart for it anymore. I bought the house in the Cotswolds and tried to reinvent myself as the mother I should have been all along. But Gavin was an adult by then, living his own life in London, and there's only so much making up you can do when your child has already grown. And then he met Brianna. She was 25 when they started dating. He was 27. I remember the first time he brought her home to meet me, about a year after Jeffrey's death. She was beautiful, polished, charming in a way that seemed almost rehearsed. She complimented everything: the house, the garden, my dress, my jewelry, the tea I served. She laughed at all the right moments and asked all the right questions and made Gavin look at her like she was the sun itself. I wanted to like her. I truly did. My son was happy for the first time since losing his father, and I wanted to embrace whoever brought that light back into his eyes. So I ignored the small things, The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she deflected questions about her own family, the way she watched me just a little too carefully, as if cataloging everything I owned. They got married a year later. I paid for the wedding, of course. Brianna had very specific tastes, and Gavin was just starting out as a solicitor. The final cost was nearly £80,000 for a ceremony that lasted 4 hours and a reception where I was seated at the back of the room, far from the main table. Brianna explained it was because the acoustics were better there. I chose to believe her. The first year of their marriage was fine. Distant, but fine. Brianna was busy establishing herself as the lady of their new household, and I was trying to respect boundaries. I visited when invited, called when it seemed appropriate, and sent generous gifts for every occasion. I was determined to be the perfect mother-in-law, the kind who helped but never interfered, the kind who gave but never expected. Then Ivy was born, and everything changed. I remember the moment I first held my granddaughter. She was 6 hours old, impossibly tiny, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. I fell in love instantly and completely. This was my second chance, I thought. I hadn't been present enough for Gavin's childhood, but I could be present for Ivy's. I could be the grandmother who showed up, who was there for every birthday, every milestone, every ordinary afternoon that needed filling with love. Brianna had other ideas. It started small. Visits that were canceled at the last minute due to vague schedule conflicts. Gifts that were returned because they were too extravagant or not age-appropriate or simply not needed. Phone calls that went unanswered for days. I told myself it was normal. New mothers were tired, overwhelmed, protective. Brianna was just adjusting to parenthood. Things would settle down. They didn't settle down. They got worse. By the time Ivy was 2, I was lucky to see her once a month. Every visit required advance notice, approval, and detailed negotiation about duration and activities. If I brought a toy Brianna didn't approve of, it disappeared. If I suggested an outing Brianna didn't sanction, it was canceled. If I tried to talk to Gavin about it, he made excuses. Brianna was stressed. Brianna was doing her best. Brianna just wanted what was best for their family. And then the financial requests began. The first time, it was the school fees. Ivy was 3, and Brianna had found a preschool that cost £12,000 a year. Gavin called me, embarrassed, explaining that they had overextended themselves with the new house and couldn't quite manage it. Could I help? Just this once? I transferred the money the same day. Of course I did. It was for my granddaughter's education. The second time it was the car. Brianna's old one had broken down, and she needed something reliable for driving Ivy around. Could I help? Just this once, I bought her a £32,000 SUV. For safety, I told myself. The third time, it was the kitchen renovation. The fourth time was the bathroom. The fifth time was the holiday to the Maldives that Brianna needed because she was so exhausted from being a mother. Each time, Gavin called with that same embarrassed voice. Each time, I said yes. Each time, Brianna took credit for the family's financial stability while treating me like an unwelcome visitor in my own son's life. I kept records of everything, not because I planned to use them, but because I was a businesswoman for 30 years and keeping records was habit. Every transfer, every payment, every expense, filed neatly, dated precisely, stored in the same envelope that I eventually left on that coffee table. By the time Ivy was 5, I had given them over £300,000, and in return, I was allowed to see my granddaughter perhaps once every 6 weeks for visits that Brianna supervised with the vigilance of a prison guard. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Brianna did in between the visits. I found out from Ivy herself during one of our rare video calls. She asked me why I never came to see her anymore. When I explained that I came as often as Mommy allowed, she looked confused. But Mommy says you're always too busy. Mommy says you don't have time for us. Brianna had been lying to my granddaughter about me, poisoning that pure little mind against me, making Ivy believe that I didn't care, that I didn't want to be there, that I was choosing to stay away. When I confronted Gavin about it, he made excuses. Brianna didn't mean it that way. It was probably a misunderstanding. Ivy was only 4. She got confused easily. Maybe I had misheard. I hadn't misheard, and Gavin knew it. But admitting that his wife was deliberately sabotaging his mother's relationship with his daughter would have meant doing something about it. And Gavin had never been good at doing something. He had always been the peacekeeper, the avoider, the one who looked away rather than face uncomfortable truths. I blamed myself for that too. If I had been more present during his childhood, maybe he would have been stronger. If Jeffrey hadn't done all the heavy lifting of parenting, maybe Gavin would have learned that conflict was sometimes necessary. If I had been a better mother, maybe I would have raised a better man. The guilt kept me silent. The guilt kept me writing checks and accepting cancellations and swallowing insults. The guilt made me believe that I deserved what Brianna was doing to me because I had failed my son first. And then came the invitation to Ivy's 5th birthday party, or rather, the lack of one. I found out about the party from Ivy during a video call that Brianna didn't know was happening. Gavin had called me while Brianna was out, and Ivy had grabbed the phone, excited about her upcoming princess party. "You're coming, right, Nana? Mommy said you couldn't, but you're coming, right?" Mommy said I couldn't. Not that I wasn't invited, that I couldn't. I told Ivy I would be there, and I meant it. When I showed up at that party, I brought the deed to a house and 5 years of bank statements. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with them. Part of me still hoped that I could give the house as the gift I had intended. Part of me still wanted to believe that love and generosity could fix this. But then I saw the plastic chair, and the garbage can, and Brianna's smile as she told me I was sitting where I belonged. And I finally understood that there was nothing I could give that would make me good enough for her. Nothing I could do to earn my place at the table. The only choice left was whether to keep begging for scraps of my own family or to walk away with my dignity intact. I chose dignity. For the first time in 7 years, I chose myself. The days after I walked out of that party were the strangest of my life. I had spent 7 years tiptoeing around Brianna, measuring every word, calculating every action, desperate not to rock the boat. Now the boat was at the bottom of the ocean, and I was floating free in open water, not sure if I was going to drown or finally learn to swim. For the first 3 days, I kept my phone off. I knew what was waiting for me if I turned it on. Gavin's frantic messages, Brianna's furious ones, demands for explanation, accusations, perhaps threats. I wasn't ready to face any of it. I needed time to sit with what I had done, to understand it, to decide what came next. I spent those days in my garden, mostly. It was late October, and there was work to be done. Cutting back the perennials, raking leaves, preparing the beds for winter. Physical labor had always helped me think, and I had a lot of thinking to do. Between sessions in the garden, I took long walks through the countryside. The Cotswolds are beautiful in autumn, all golden fields and ancient stone walls and sheep dotting the hillsides like cotton balls. I walked until my legs ached and my mind quieted, and the constant loop of what have I done finally began to slow. On the 4th day, I turned my phone back on. 147 missed calls, 89 from Gavin, 58 from Brianna, 43 voicemails, 61 text messages. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and began to work through them chronologically. The first few from Gavin were confused, concerned. "Mom, what happened? Where did you go? Brianna is really upset. Please call me back." Then they shifted to pleading. "Mom, we need to talk about this. Whatever's going on, we can work it out. Please just call me." Then, by day 2, frustration crept in. "I don't understand why you're doing this. You can't just drop a bomb like that and disappear. This is really unfair." Brianna's messages followed a different trajectory. The first few were pure rage, barely coherent. "How dare you? You have no right. You're going to regret this." By day 2, she had shifted to cold fury. "I don't know what you think you're proving, but those statements don't mean what you think they mean. You're embarrassing yourself and hurting your son." By day 3, something new entered her voice. Something that sounded almost like fear. "We need to discuss this privately. Before you do anything else, we need to talk." I listened to every voicemail, read every text. I wanted to understand exactly where things stood before I decided how to respond. What I understood was this: Brianna was scared. Not of me exactly, of exposure. Those bank statements proved that everything she had told Gavin about her own financial management was a lie. Every time she had claimed to have saved enough for a vacation, it was my money. Every time she had proudly announced that they were doing well despite the expensive lifestyle, it was my money. Every time she had suggested that her budgeting skills were the reason they could afford Ivy's school and her car and their renovated kitchen, it was my money. And now Gavin knew it. And so did 23 party guests, at least some of whom were bound to talk. I waited until the 5th day to call my son. I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be calm. I wanted to say what I needed to say without anger or tears or accusations. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, thank God. Where have you been?" "I've been at home, Gavin. I needed time to think." "Time to think? You humiliated my wife in front of everyone we know and then disappeared for 5 days. I've been worried sick." I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I said, "Have you looked at the bank statements?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Yes, I've looked at them. And," another pause, "I don't understand. These payments, some of them go back years. The school fees, the car, the kitchen. You've been paying for all of it?" "Yes. But Brianna said she was managing the money. She said she had it under control. She lied to you, Gavin. She's been lying to you for years. And she's been treating me like garbage while spending my money and taking credit for it." I heard him exhale. It was a sound I knew well. The sound of Gavin confronting something he didn't want to see. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer. We both knew what the answer was. "I want to see Ivy," I said. "I don't expect you to leave your wife or blow up your life, but I want regular access to my granddaughter, real access, not supervised visits that Brianna cancels whenever she feels like it, not once every 6 weeks if I'm lucky. I want to be part of her life." "Mom, it's complicated. Brianna is really upset right now. The guests saw everything. People are talking. She feels humiliated. She humiliated me first, Gavin. She put my place setting next to the garbage can at my granddaughter's birthday party. She told me I was sitting where I belonged. She says you're exaggerating. She says it was the only seat available. There it was. Even now, even with the bank statements proving years of deception, Gavin was still making excuses for his wife, still choosing the path of least resistance, still refusing to see what was right in front of him. "I'm not exaggerating," I said quietly, "and I think you know that." The conversation didn't resolve anything. Gavin said he needed time to think. He needed to talk to Brianna. He needed to figure out what was true and what wasn't. I told him to take all the time he needed, but that I was done apologizing for having self-respect. We hung up, and I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my garden watching the sun set. I had said what I needed to say. The rest was up to him. 2 weeks passed, then 3. October became November, and the weather turned cold and gray. I heard nothing from Gavin, nothing from Brianna. The silence was somehow worse than the angry messages had been. At least when they were calling constantly, I knew they were thinking about me. Now I had no idea what was happening. Were they reconciling their marriage around a shared enemy? Was Brianna spinning new lies to explain away the bank statements? Was Gavin choosing his wife over his mother yet again? The not knowing was torture. But I refused to break first. I had spent 7 years chasing after my son's family, begging for scraps of attention and access. If Gavin wanted a relationship with me, he could make the first move. He did finally on a gray Sunday afternoon in mid-November. I was reading by the fire when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Gavin's BMW, and my heart started pounding despite myself. He came to the door alone. No Brianna, no Ivy, just my son, looking exhausted and older than his 34 years. I made tea, because that's what you do. We sat in my living room, the fire crackling softly, and he told me what had been happening. The dinner party had been a disaster, as I had guessed. After I left, Brianna had tried to spin the situation. She told the guests that I was a difficult, unstable woman who had always resented her, that the bank statements were fabricated or misrepresented, that I was trying to destroy her marriage out of jealousy and spite. But the statements were very clear: dates, amounts, account numbers, and some of the guests had started asking questions. How exactly had Brianna afforded that Maldives trip last year? Didn't she mention she had saved for it herself? What about the kitchen renovation? The car? By the time the party ended, Brianna's carefully constructed facade was cracking, and in the weeks that followed, It shattered completely. Gavin had started looking at their finances. Really looking, for the first time in their marriage. He discovered that Brianna had been hiding credit card debt. Nearly £40,000 accumulated over the past 3 years on shopping and spa treatments, and things she claimed she had gotten on sale. She had been making minimum payments while telling him they were debt-free. He discovered that the savings account she said contained their emergency fund was nearly empty. She had been drawing from it for years. He discovered that she had been telling her friends that his career was failing, that he wasn't providing adequately for his family. She had been positioning herself as the long-suffering wife of an unsuccessful man, even while spending his mother's money like water. The picture that emerged was of a woman Gavin barely recognized, someone who had been lying to him systematically for years, someone whose entire presentation of their marriage had been a careful construction of falsehoods. I listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, I asked the only question that mattered. "What are you going to do?" He looked at me with eyes that reminded me painfully of Jeffrey. Lost, confused, searching for someone to tell him the right answer. "I don't know, Mum. I love her. At least, I thought I did. But I don't know who she is anymore." "What about Ivy?" His face crumpled, just for a moment. Then he pulled himself together. "That's the hardest part. Whatever happens between Brianna and me, Ivy needs her mother. I can't just blow up our family." I understood what he was saying. I also understood what he wasn't saying. He was still hoping this could all be fixed somehow. Still hoping that Brianna would apologize, change, become the woman he had believed she was. Still avoiding the hard truth that some things once broken can't be repaired. "I want to see Ivy," I said again. "Whatever you decide about your marriage, I want a relationship with my granddaughter." He nodded slowly. "I know. I'm trying to work that out. Brianna is really resistant right now." "Of course she is. I exposed her lies. She's afraid of what else I might expose." Gavin flinched at that, but he didn't deny it. "Give me time, Mum. Please. I know I've let you down. I know I should have seen what was happening, but I'm trying to figure out the best path forward for everyone, including Ivy." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask how much more time he needed, how many more years I was supposed to wait while he figured things out, how many more of Ivy's birthdays I would miss while he tried not to upset his wife. But I looked at my son's face, and I saw how much he was struggling. This wasn't the moment to push. This was the moment to plant a seed and let it grow. "All right," I said, "but I won't wait forever, Gavin. I've already lost 5 years of Ivy's life to your wife's manipulations. I don't intend to lose any more." He left an hour later, promising to call soon, promising to work things out. I watched his car disappear down the driveway and wondered if he would keep those promises or if they would evaporate like all the others. The next few weeks brought small changes. Gavin called more often, sometimes just to talk. He told me about arguments he was having with Brianna, about her attempts to explain away the bank statements and the credit card debt and all the other lies. She had a justification for everything, he said. A reason, an excuse, a way of spinning each deception into something almost reasonable. But the more he talked to me, the less her explanations seemed to satisfy him. I could hear the doubt growing in his voice, the questions he was starting to ask. In early December, he called with news. He and Brianna had agreed to a trial separation. She was going to stay in the house with Ivy. He was going to stay with a colleague from work. They were going to try to figure things out with some distance between them. And in the meantime, he had arranged for me to see Ivy. My first visit with my granddaughter in nearly 3 months happened on a cold Saturday afternoon. Gavin brought her to my house, just the two of them. Brianna had refused to participate, which was fine with me. I didn't need her supervision. I didn't want it. When Ivy ran through my front door, I burst into tears. I couldn't help it. 3 months of worry and fear and longing, and suddenly here she was, small and perfect and alive in my arms. "Nana Ellie, I missed you so much. Why did you go away?" I held her tight and breathed in the smell of her hair and tried to find words that a 5-year-old could understand. "I didn't go away, sweetheart. I was always right here, waiting for you. But Mommy said you were too busy again." Of course she did. Even now, even in the middle of everything falling apart, Brianna was still poisoning my granddaughter against me. I pulled back and looked into Ivy's eyes, Jeffrey's eyes, Gavin's eyes, the same warm brown that I had loved for over 30 years. Ivy, I need you to understand something important. I am never too busy for you. Never. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are hard to explain, and those problems might keep us apart sometimes. But it's never because I don't want to see you. Do you understand? She nodded solemnly. I wasn't sure she really understood, but she would someday. And in the meantime, I would show her with actions what words couldn't convey. We spent the afternoon baking cookies and watching cartoons and playing in the garden, despite the cold. By the time Gavin came to pick her up, Ivy was exhausted and happy and covered in flour. She hugged me so tight when she left that I thought my heart would break. I love you, Nana Ellie. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you will ever know. I watched them drive away, and I felt something shifting inside me. Hope, maybe. Or determination. Or both. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster. Some days, Gavin seemed ready to leave Brianna for good. Other days, she pulled him back with tears and promises and manipulations I could only imagine. The trial separation stretched on through December, through the holidays. I saw Ivy twice more, once for an afternoon visit and once for an overnight stay. Each time, she left a little piece of herself in my house, and I treasured every moment. But Brianna was not going quietly. I heard from Gavin that she was telling everyone who would listen that I had destroyed her marriage, that I was a controlling, vindictive old woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy, that I had fabricated the bank statements or taken them out of context, that I was using my money to manipulate and control. Some people believed her, others didn't. I stopped caring which was which. What I cared about was Ivy. What I cared about was being present for my granddaughter in the way I hadn't been present for my son. What I cared about was finally choosing my own dignity over someone else's comfort. In January, Gavin filed for divorce. He called to tell me the night before he did it. His voice was calm, steady, more certain than I had heard him in years. I can't do it anymore, Mom. I can't keep pretending I don't see who she is. The lies, the manipulation, the way she treated you. It's not just about the money. It's about everything. The person I thought I married doesn't exist. I felt tears running down my face, but my voice was steady when I answered. I'm sorry, Gavin. I know this isn't what you wanted. No, but it's what's right. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I let her treat you that way for so long. It was the first real apology he had ever given me. The first time he had acknowledged, truly acknowledged, what had been happening for 7 years. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. We talked for a long time that night. About the divorce, about Ivy, about the future, about Jeffrey and how much we both missed him. About my failures as a mother and his failures as a son, and how maybe, just maybe, we could do better now. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was something more complicated. The beginning of understanding, the first step on a long road back to each other. When we finally hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about how strange life was, how a plastic chair next to a garbage can had led to this moment, how the worst humiliation of my life had become the catalyst for something that might eventually be healing. I was not naive enough to think the hard part was over. Brianna would fight the divorce. She would fight for custody, for money, for the house, for everything she could get. There would be lawyers and court dates and ugly accusations. There would be more attempts to turn Ivy against me, more lies, more manipulation. But for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't facing it alone. For the first time, my son was standing beside me, and that made all the difference. The divorce proceedings began in early February, and Brianna came out swinging. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. A woman who had spent 7 years carefully constructing a web of lies wasn't going to surrender gracefully when that web was torn apart. But even I wasn't prepared for how vicious she would become. The first salvo came in the form of a letter from her lawyer. It accused Gavin of emotional abuse, financial control, and neglect. It claimed that he had deliberately isolated Brianna from her support systems and forced her into financial dependence. It demanded full custody of Ivy, the house, spousal support of £8,000 per month, and a lump sum settlement of £500,000. When Gavin showed me the letter, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost impressive. Brianna had spent years controlling every aspect of their family life, lying about money, manipulating everyone around her, and now she was claiming to be the victim. But my laughter died when I read the next part. The letter also named me as a hostile influence who had deliberately interfered in the marriage. It claimed I had used my wealth to manipulate my son and alienate his wife. It suggested that any custody arrangement should include provisions preventing unsupervised contact between Ivy and me. She was trying to take my granddaughter away from me, legally, officially, permanently. I called my own lawyer that afternoon. Patricia Chen was one of the best family law solicitors in London, and she had represented me during the sale of my business years ago. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly. Is there anything in your past, anything at all, that Brianna could use against you? Any history of instability? Any conflicts with authorities? Anything that could be twisted to make you look like an unfit influence on a child?" I thought carefully before answering. "No, nothing. I built a successful business. I've never been arrested or even had a speeding ticket. I don't drink to excess. I don't have any history of mental health crises. My record is clean." "Good. Because based on what you're telling me, Brianna is going to try to paint you as the villain of this story. We need to be prepared." The weeks that followed were brutal. Brianna's lawyer requested financial records going back a decade. He subpoenaed my bank statements, my tax returns, my business records from before the sale. He was looking for anything that could be used to suggest I had used money inappropriately or manipulatively. What he found, of course, was the opposite. Meticulous records of every gift, every loan, every payment I had made to support my son's family. Documentation that proved beyond any doubt that Brianna had been the beneficiary of my generosity while treating me with contempt. But Brianna had a spin for that too. She claimed that my financial support had been coercive, that I had used money to control Gavin, to undermine her authority as a wife and mother, to buy influence with Ivy. She painted me as a wealthy manipulator who couldn't stand to see her son build an independent life. It was a bold strategy. It was also, I came to realize, her only strategy. Because without the ability to reframe reality, Brianna had nothing. The facts were against her. The bank statements were irrefutable. The witnesses from Ivy's birthday party had seen her cruelty with their own eyes. The only way she could win was by making everyone believe that up was down and black was white, and the victim was actually the aggressor. For a few terrifying weeks, I thought it might work. Brianna was convincing. She had spent years perfecting the art of making herself look good and others look bad. In meetings with mediators, she cried at all the right moments. In written statements, she used all the right language of victimhood and trauma. She was so polished, so practiced, that even I sometimes wondered if I was remembering things correctly. And then she made a mistake. It happened in late March, during a custody evaluation. A court-appointed psychologist had been meeting with both parents, observing their interactions with Ivy, assessing the family dynamics. Brianna had been on her best behavior for weeks, performing the role of devoted mother with her usual skill. But the psychologist was good at her job. Too good. She asked questions that couldn't be answered with prepared scripts. She observed moments that couldn't be staged. And she noticed things that Brianna had been careful to hide, like the way Ivy flinched when her mother raised her voice, like the way Brianna's warmth toward her daughter seemed to switch off the moment she thought no one was watching. Like the way Ivy asked repeatedly when she could see her Nana Ellie, and Brianna's face hardened each time. The psychologist's report was devastating. It described Brianna as presenting with narcissistic traits, noting her difficulty with empathy, her tendency to view relationships in transactional terms, and her pattern of manipulating others to maintain a favorable image. It expressed concern about her ability to prioritize Ivy's emotional needs over her own desire for control. Most damning of all, it noted that Ivy seemed happier and more relaxed when discussing time spent with her grandmother than when discussing time with her mother. Brianna lost control when she read the report. I wasn't there, but Gavin told me about it later. She screamed at her lawyer. She threatened to sue the psychologist. She called Gavin every name she could think of and accused him of bribing the evaluator. And then she made her fatal error. In her fury, she sent Gavin a series of text messages that she must have assumed would remain private between them. Messages that revealed exactly who she was beneath the polished exterior. She called Ivy a burden. She said the only reason she had ever wanted a child was to secure her position in the marriage. She admitted that she had deliberately sabotaged my relationship with my granddaughter because she saw me as a threat to her control. She wrote in black and white on a screen that could be screenshotted and submitted to the court that she didn't actually love her daughter. She loved what her daughter could provide her: status, leverage, a permanent tie to Gavin's income. Gavin forwarded those messages to his lawyer the same day he received them. By the end of the week, they were part of the court record. I remember the moment Gavin called to tell me what had happened. I was in my garden planting spring bulbs, getting dirt under my fingernails and thinking about the future. When I heard his voice, I knew something had changed. "It's over, Mum. Her lawyer just called mine. Brianna is willing to negotiate." I sat down on the garden bench, my hands still covered in soil, and let the tears come. It wasn't just relief, it was vindication. It was 7 years of swallowed pain finally finding release. It was the knowledge that the truth, the actual truth about who Brianna was and what she had done, was finally being seen by people who mattered. The plastic chair next to the garbage can, the years of manipulation and cruelty, the lies told to my granddaughter about why I wasn't there. It all mattered now. It was all part of the record now, and Brianna could never spin her way out of her own words. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late April. Spring had arrived in London, and the trees along the street outside the courthouse were blooming pink and white. It seemed strange, all that beauty surrounding a day that would decide so much ugliness. I wasn't required to be there. This was between Gavin and Brianna, legally speaking. But my son asked me to come, and so I did. I wore my best navy suit, the one I used to wear to important business meetings. I put on the pearl earrings Jeffrey had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a successful woman with nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Brianna arrived with her lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who had been billing her thousands of pounds to pursue a losing case. She looked thinner than the last time I had seen her, and there were dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. For a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she saw me, and her face twisted into something ugly. Pure hatred, undisguised. Whatever mask she had worn for 7 years was gone now. This was the real Brianna, the one she had hidden so carefully behind her polished smile and her perfect manners. I met her gaze and didn't look away. I had nothing to fear from her anymore. The hearing took most of the day. There were financial matters to settle, property to divide, debts to allocate. Brianna had run up nearly £60,000 in credit card debt by the end, money spent on lawyers and clothes, and desperate attempts to maintain a lifestyle she could no longer afford. The judge was not sympathetic, but all of that was just preamble. What everyone was really waiting for was the custody decision. Gavin's lawyer presented the case methodically. The psychologist's report, the text messages Brianna had sent admitting she didn't love Ivy. The pattern of lies and manipulation documented over years. The testimony of witnesses from the birthday party who had seen Brianna direct me to sit by the garbage can. The bank statements proving that she had claimed credit for money I had provided. Brianna's lawyer tried to counter, but there wasn't much he could do. The evidence was overwhelming. The only strategy left was to attack the credibility of everyone involved, to suggest that we had all conspired against his client, that the psychologist was biased and the witnesses were lying and the text messages had been taken out of context. It was a desperate, flailing defense, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. When it was Brianna's turn to speak on her own behalf, I watched her carefully. This was the moment she had been building toward. Her last chance to perform, to persuade, to spin the story one more time. She started well. Her voice trembled just enough to suggest vulnerability without seeming weak. She spoke about how much she loved Ivy, how she had sacrificed her career to be a full-time mother, how she had always tried to do what was best for her family. She talked about feeling overwhelmed and isolated, about the pressure of living up to the expectations of a wealthy mother-in-law who never thought she was good enough. I felt Gavin tense beside me. Part of him still wanted to believe her. Part of him would probably always want to believe her. That's what 7 years of manipulation does to a person. It leaves hooks in your heart that take years to remove. But then Brianna made a mistake. The same kind of mistake she had made with those text messages. She couldn't resist taking a shot at me. "My mother-in-law has always resented me," she said, her voice rising. "From the day I met her, she made it clear that no one would ever be good enough for her precious son. She used her money to control us, to undermine our marriage, to turn my daughter against me. Everything that has happened in this divorce is because of her interference." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Ashworth, the evidence before this court suggests that your mother-in-law provided substantial financial support to your family over many years. Are you claiming this support was unwelcome?" Brianna hesitated. This was the trap. If she said the money was unwelcome, she would have to explain why she accepted it. If she admitted it was helpful, she would undermine her own narrative of being controlled by it. "It was complicated," she said finally. "She used the money to insert herself into our lives in ways that weren't healthy." "Can you give a specific example?" Another hesitation. "She was always trying to buy Ivy's affection. Expensive gifts, trips, things we couldn't afford ourselves. She made us feel inadequate." "I see. And the text messages you sent to your husband, in which you stated that you didn't love your daughter and only had a child to secure your position in the marriage, were those also complicated?" Brianna's face went pale. "I was angry when I wrote those. I didn't mean them. You wrote, and I quote, 'The only reason I had Ivy was to make sure you couldn't leave me. I never wanted to be a mother. She's a burden I'm stuck with because of your mother's expectations.' Can you explain what you did mean by that, if not what the words plainly say?" I watched Brianna's composure crack. It was like watching a building start to crumble, small pieces falling away before the whole structure collapsed. I was upset. Gavin and I were fighting. People say things they don't mean when they're upset. Do they also say them in writing, in multiple messages, over the course of several hours? Brianna had no answer for that. She stood there, mouth opening and closing, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the performed fear of a victim. The genuine fear of someone who realizes they have finally been seen for who they truly are. The judge called a recess. I went outside for air, leaving Gavin with his lawyer to discuss strategy. The spring sunshine was warm on my face, and I stood on the courthouse steps watching people pass by. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the drama unfolding inside. Brianna came out a few minutes later. She was alone. Her lawyer was probably still inside, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Two women who had spent 7 years in a war that only one of us had known was happening. "You must be so pleased with yourself," she said finally. Her voice was flat, all the performance drained out of it. "You've destroyed my life." I considered my response carefully. There were so many things I could have said. So many years of accumulated grievances I could have thrown back at her. But looking at her standing there, stripped of her masks and her manipulations, I realized I didn't need to. "You destroyed your own life, Brianna. I just stopped helping you hide the destruction." She laughed. It was an ugly sound, nothing like the musical laugh she had used to charm my son years ago. "You think you've won, but Ivy is still my daughter. Whatever the judge decides, she'll always be my daughter. And someday, when she's old enough, I'll tell her the truth about you, about how her grandmother tore her family apart because she couldn't stand to share her son." I shook my head. Ivy already knows the truth. She knows that I love her. She knows that I never stopped trying to see her. And someday, when she's old enough, she'll read the court records. She'll see the text messages you sent. She'll understand exactly who you are. Brianna's face contorted. For a moment, I thought she might actually strike me. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and her whole body trembled with rage. "You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so perfect, with your money and your big house and your devoted son. But you were never there for him when he was growing up. You were too busy building your precious business. I was there. I was the one who made him feel loved and wanted. And you couldn't stand that someone else finally came first." There was a grain of truth in her words. just a grain. I had been absent too often during Gavin's childhood. I had put my career before my family in ways I still regretted. But that truth didn't excuse 7 years of cruelty and manipulation. It didn't justify the garbage can, or the canceled visits, or the lies she had told my granddaughter about me. "You're right that I made mistakes with Gavin," I said quietly. "I wish I had been more present when he was young. But my failures as a mother don't give you the right to abuse me. They don't excuse what you've done." Before she could respond, the courthouse doors opened and Gavin appeared. He looked between us, his face tight with tension. "The judge is ready. We need to go back in." Brianna turned and walked past him without a word. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding. Whatever happened next would shape the rest of my life, and Ivy's life, and all the years we might or might not have together. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She shuffled papers on her desk for a moment, and the silence in the courtroom was absolute. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case," she began, "including the psychological evaluation, the financial records, the text messages entered into evidence, and the testimony of both parties. This is a deeply troubling case, and my primary concern, as always, is the welfare of the minor child involved." I held my breath. Beside me, Gavin was completely still. The evidence clearly indicates a pattern of deception and manipulation on the part of Mrs. Brianna Ashworth. The text messages she sent to her husband are particularly concerning, as they suggest a fundamental lack of maternal attachment and a willingness to use her child as a tool for personal advantage. Brianna made a small sound. I didn't look at her. The psychological evaluation supports this concern, describing Mrs. Ashworth as presenting with narcissistic traits that may impair her ability to prioritize her daughter's emotional needs. While I am hesitant to make judgments based on personality assessments alone, the evaluator's observations are consistent with the documented behavior. The judge paused, looking directly at Brianna. "Mrs. Ashworth, I want to be very clear. The evidence before me does not paint a picture of a loving mother who made mistakes under pressure. It paints a picture of a woman who systematically lied to her husband about finances, deliberately alienated her daughter from her grandmother, and admitted in writing that she views her child as a burden rather than a blessing. These are not the actions of someone who should have primary custody of a 5-year-old girl." Brianna burst into tears. Whether they were real or performed, I couldn't tell. Perhaps even she didn't know anymore. "I am awarding primary custody of Ivy Ashworth to her father, Gavin Ashworth. Mrs. Ashworth will have supervised visitation every other weekend, with the supervision to be provided by a court-appointed monitor. This arrangement will be reviewed in 1 year, at which time Mrs. Ashworth may petition for expanded visitation if she can demonstrate consistent engagement with therapy and parenting classes." I felt tears streaming down my own face. Gavin reached over and took my hand. "Regarding the financial matters," the judge continued, "Mrs. Ashworth has accumulated significant debt during the marriage through spending that was hidden from her husband. This debt will remain her sole responsibility. The marital home will be sold, with proceeds divided equally after the mortgage and other shared debts are satisfied. Mr. Ashworth is ordered to pay spousal support of £2,000 per month for a period of 3 years, at which time the support will end." It was so much less than Brianna had demanded, so much less than she had expected. I watched her face as the numbers registered, watched her understand that the lifestyle she had fought so hard to maintain was gone forever. Finally, I want to address the role of Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth, the paternal grandmother. The evidence shows that she provided substantial financial support to the family over many years, support that was apparently accepted by Mrs. Brianna Ashworth, while she simultaneously worked to exclude Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth from family events and from a relationship with her granddaughter. I find this behavior troubling and inconsistent with the best interests of the child. The judge looked at me directly. "Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth, there is no evidence that you have ever acted inappropriately toward your granddaughter or attempted to undermine her parents' authority. To the contrary, the evidence suggests that you have been a loving and generous grandmother who was unfairly excluded from your granddaughter's life. I encourage the parties to facilitate a healthy relationship between Ivy and her grandmother going forward. I couldn't speak. 7 years of fighting, 7 years of being treated like garbage, and finally someone with authority had seen the truth and spoken it out loud. The judge wrapped up with some final procedural matters. There would be paperwork to sign, details to finalize, a transition period to navigate. But the essential decision had been made. Gavin had custody, Brianna had supervised visits, and I had been vindicated. As we left the courtroom, Gavin pulled me into a hug. He was crying too, something I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up, for making me see." I held my son and let myself feel, for the first time in years, like maybe everything was going to be okay. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun was still shining. The trees were still blooming. And somewhere across the city, my granddaughter was waiting for the news that would change her life. She was coming home, to her father, to me, to a family that would finally put her first. 6 months later, I watched Ivy blow out the candles on her 6th birthday cake. We were in my garden in the Cotswolds. The summer had been glorious, all blue skies and golden afternoons, and the flowers I had planted in spring were blooming in riotous color around the stone patio. There were balloons tied to the chairs and streamers hanging from the old oak tree. A modest gathering this time. Just Gavin, Ivy, myself, and a few of Ivy's school friends with their parents. No place cards, no plastic chairs, and definitely no garbage cans anywhere near the table. Ivy closed her eyes tight before she blew, concentrating hard on her wish. When she opened them again, all 6 candles were out, and everyone clapped and cheered. She grinned at me with frosting already smeared on her chin. "Did you see, Nana Ellie? I got them all in one breath." "I saw, sweetheart. You must have had a very important wish." She nodded solemnly. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true, but it's a really good one." I didn't ask what she had wished for. Some things are sacred, even the wishes of 6-year-olds, but I hoped, whatever it was, that she would get it. She deserved every good thing the world had to offer. After the cake was eaten, and the presents were opened, and the other children had gone home with their parents, Gavin and Ivy and I sat together in the fading evening light. Ivy was exhausted, curled up on the garden bench with her head in my lap, fighting sleep. Gavin sat across from us, watching his daughter with an expression I had come to know well over the past months. Wonder mixed with worry, love mixed with fear, the complicated emotions of a parent who was still learning how to do this on his own. "She seems happy," I said quietly, stroking Ivy's hair. "She is happy, happier than I've seen her in a long time." He paused. "She asked about Brianna yesterday. First time in weeks." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice neutral. "What did she ask?" "When she could see her again." I told her soon. The supervised visit is scheduled for next Saturday. The visits had been happening every other week, as the court ordered. A social worker sat in a room with Brianna and Ivy for 2 hours while they played games or did crafts or just talked. From what Gavin told me, the visits were awkward. Brianna was trying in her way. She showed up on time. She brought appropriate gifts. She said the right things. But Ivy came home from those visits quiet and withdrawn in a way she never was after spending time with me or with her father. Whatever connection Brianna was trying to build, it wasn't quite taking root. You cannot manufacture love. I had learned that lesson the hard way, and now Brianna was learning it too. "How do you feel about the visits?" I asked Gavin. He considered the question for a long moment. "I want Ivy to have a relationship with her mother. Every child deserves that. But I watch her come home, and she seems smaller somehow, like she's been holding her breath for 2 hours and can finally exhale." Children are perceptive. They know when they're being loved for who they are, and they know when they're being used for what they provide. Gavin nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about those text messages, about what Brianna wrote, that she never wanted to be a mother, that Ivy was just a tool to keep me tied to her." His voice caught. "How do you love a child when you know her mother feels that way about her? You love her enough for both parents. You show up every day and you make her feel safe and valued and cherished. That's all any of us can do." He looked at me with Jeffrey's eyes, and I saw the little boy I had failed to be present for, all grown up and trying to do better than I had done. "Is that what you did with me? Tried to love me enough?" The question hit me somewhere deep. I had spent months waiting for Gavin to ask it, dreading it, and hoping for it in equal measure. "No," I said honestly. "I didn't do that with you. I was too focused on building the business, on proving that I could succeed in a world that didn't expect much from women like me. I told myself that providing for you financially was the same as being present for you emotionally. It wasn't. I see that now." Gavin was quiet for a long moment. Ivy stirred in my lap, murmured something, then settled back into sleep. "I used to resent you for it," he said finally. "When I was a teenager especially. Dad was always there, and you were always working. I thought it meant you didn't care about me as much as you cared about your career. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. I know, and I understand now, better than I did then. You were building something. You were trying to give us security, opportunity, a better life than you had growing up. Those are good reasons. They're reasons. I'm not sure they're good enough." He smiled, just slightly. "Maybe not. But you're here now. You've been here for the past year, fighting for me and for Ivy when you had every reason to walk away. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," I said. "At least, I hope it does." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the hills. The sky turned pink and gold and then deep purple, and the first stars began to appear. Somewhere in the garden, a nightingale started to sing. This was what I had wanted, I realized. Not revenge on Brianna, though I won't pretend that wasn't satisfying. Not vindication in court, though that had its own sweetness. This, my son and my granddaughter, here with me, safe and loved and free from the manipulation that had poisoned our family for so long. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, standing in that kitchen at Ivy's birthday party, looking at the plastic chair next to the garbage can. That woman had been beaten down by 7 years of cruelty, so desperate for access to her granddaughter that she had tolerated humiliation after humiliation. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had finally learned that loving your family doesn't mean accepting abuse from them, that keeping the peace isn't worth anything if it costs you your dignity, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let the truth speak for itself. Brianna had tried to throw me away like garbage. Instead, she had thrown away everything she claimed to want: her marriage, her comfortable lifestyle, her unchallenged control over her daughter. All of it, gone. And for what? The momentary satisfaction of putting me in my place? I could almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Gavin stood and carefully lifted Ivy into his arms. She murmured again, but didn't wake, her head falling against his shoulder with absolute trust. "I should get her to bed. We have a long drive back to London tomorrow. You could stay another night. There's no rush." He smiled. "There's always a rush. But maybe next weekend. She keeps asking when she can come help you in the garden again." "Anytime. Always. You know that." He carried Ivy inside, and I stayed in the garden a while longer, watching the stars multiply across the darkening sky. Jeffrey had loved nights like this. He used to point out the constellations to me, telling me the stories behind their names. I missed him still, every day. But the missing had softened over the years, become something I could hold without being cut by it. I thought about what Ivy might have wished for when she blew out her candles. Maybe it was a pony, or a trip to Disneyland, or some toy she had seen advertised on television. Normal 6-year-old wishes. Or maybe it was something simpler. Maybe she had wished for exactly what she had right now. A father who loved her. A grandmother who would fight for her. A life free from the tension and manipulation that had defined her earliest years. If that was her wish, it had already come true. And I intended to spend whatever years I had left making sure it stayed true. I walked inside, turned off the garden lights, and went to check on my granddaughter one more time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully in the room I had decorated just for her, surrounded by stuffed animals and fairy lights and all the love I had stored up for the years I was kept away. "Good night, sweetheart," I whispered. "Nana Ellie loves you." She didn't stir, but I could have sworn I saw her smile. And that is how a plastic chair next to a garbage can changed everything. How a moment of cruelty became the catalyst for truth. How a daughter-in-law who tried to throw me away ended up losing everything she had schemed so hard to keep. I don't know what the future holds. Ivy will grow up, and there will be new challenges, New complications, new ways for Brianna to try to poison our relationship. The court orders won't last forever. Someday, Ivy will be old enough to make her own choices about who she wants in her life. But I'm not worried. Because I know something Brianna never understood. You cannot buy love, but you cannot fake it either. And in the end, children always know the difference. Ivy knows who fought for her. She knows who showed up again and again, even when the doors were closed and the invitations were withheld and the lies were piling up. She knows who sat next to the garbage and still came back, still loved her, still refused to give up. She knows. And that knowledge will outlast any manipulation Brianna might attempt. I walked away from that birthday party with my dignity intact and the truth in my hands. It was the best decision I ever made. Some doors only close so that better ones can open. And my door is always open now. Always.